So next up, we're going to call on, all right. I thought I had it bad with heels up here. So I'll just call our next panel to the front here. I'll make some room. I'll move over. So next up, we have a panel discussion. This one's brought to us by the Canadian Canola Growers Association. Hi. Hello. Howdy, folks. So as you can see, the title, but I'll read it. It's Taking It Off the Farm, Ideas and Connecting to Big Policy Issues. So I'm joined by, Dean Roberts, and I've been told you're going to introduce yourself, okay, as well as the panelists. Is that what you were told to?
You bet.
All right, perfect. So I guess take it away. Here's your clicker of power, and thank you so much. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. So on behalf of the Canadian Canola Growers Association, welcome everyone to this morning's exciting session on taking it off the farm, ideas and connecting to big policy issues. For the next hour, we're going to dive into a big topic that can have both short and long-term implications on the farm, and that's agriculture policy. CCGA has been part of this conference for several years, and we're pleased to be back and hosting this panel. So I'll be your moderator for today. So my background, I've been on a number of local and regional boards, but my education, my background is in engineering. So when I started farming, I was all about the technology, I was all about the agronomy, what products can I use, how can I optimize my equipment. But as I got going through my career, I kept running into the buts. Well, I could use this product, but it's not registered. I could use this product, but there's no MRL for export. I could use this new piece of technology like a drone to spot spray Canada thistle, but it's not legal for use in Canada. So these buts kept reminding me that while the agronomy works, without ag policy to support them, we really can't use them. So that's what got me thinking about ag policy. So that's me. This is the panel we brought together for you today. It's an interesting group of people coming from different lenses, different perspectives to look at ag policy. So our three lenses today, we have Dave Carey, who's going to talk about the boots on the ground in Ottawa, what it looks like in Ottawa. Dave's going to call it the state of play. Janice is going to talk to us a bit about the industry groups, government and industry, and how her experiences have been. And then Jeff is going to bring the farmer director perspective. Jeff has been on a number of boards. He's done a lot of good things for us. So he's going to share some of those examples. So quick format for the session. Each of the presenters is going to give a 15-minute presentation. Then I have some questions I wanted to ask. And then we'll open it up for questions from the floor. And that's, I want you to start thinking about your questions now. That's the best part of this session, is interacting with the crowd. I can sit at home and listen to talk radio all day. I can't engage with you folks. So please start thinking about your questions now. With the formalities are over, our first guest is up, and that is Mr. Dave Carey. So Dave Carey is the Vice President of Government and Industry Relations with the Canadian Canola Growers Association. Based out of Ottawa, Dave leads our lobbying efforts and spends his days engaging directly with parliamentarians and federal policymakers on agriculture policy issues on our behalf. He serves on the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance and also co-chairs the Agriculture Carbon Alliance, a first-of-its-kind coalition of 15 agriculture groups focused on advocacy about agri-environmental policy issues, including the introduction and support of Bill C-234, an on-farm exemption for carbon pricing. Dave has been recognized by his peers for his excellence in his field and has been recognized as one of the Hill Times top 100 lobbyists in 2021 and 2022. Now, Dave wasn't able to be here in person today, but he did record a presentation for us. So if I do this right, we will see Dave in a minute.
Hello. Sorry I can't be there with you in person. I hope you have a great conference. A big thank you to the organizers for having me to offer a few minutes of my perspective on how we can connect on the big policy priorities. This is from my sort of perspective and vantage point as a lobbyist, but as a lobbyist that represents the interests of Canada's 43,000 canola farmers. I'm based in downtown Ottawa, Supreme Court just outside my window, 2 blocks from Parliament Hill. So I'll offer much from my perspective from that sort of vantage point. Thanks to Dean for moderating, and to my panelists, Jeff and Jan. So I'm going to talk about a few categories in the sort of 14, 15 minutes, kind of background what are the big issues? What is the current state of play in Ottawa? Bit of what does the day-to-day look like for an agricultural lobbyist? Our approach to advocacy, and lastly, just highlight a couple kind of few wins that we have had in 2022. So background, what is a lobbyist? There are different kinds, three main kinds. An in-house lobbyist, like myself, day in and day out with the same organization. That would also apply to those who work for a company that are there day in and day out for their company. Then there's consultants who typically work for government relations firms, and they would represent, have a number of clients that they would have on retainer or project based that they advocate for, arrange meetings, provide insight, etc. And then there's sort of the talking heads, which you see on TV that provide analysis and overview, but mostly are less involved in the actual day-to-day advocating. Our goal, I guess, our job is to freedom to operate for whoever we represent is a huge one. We're trying to advance policy issues for us with the ultimate goal of helping farmers succeed, and really to do that, trying to create a legislative and regulatory environment that allows farmers to do what they do best, which is to farm, which is to be farmers. We do that by trying to reduce red tape, informing and improving policy programs, its conception, how it's developed, how it's delivered. Supporting or pushing back on ideas, right? Good policy ideas, bad policy ideas. We bring those opinions to bear. And then risk management. A lot of what we do here, which is probably one of the least understood, is making the best of bad situations, softening edges, improving where we can, delaying things, kicking the can down the road when possible on certain files. But a lot of it does come down to risk management and having that intel for the boots on the ground that allow us to make policy decisions. So what are the issues? I mean, where to begin? At CCJ, anything that impacts on farm profitability. So we have a lot of issues that we don't necessarily advocate for at the political level, but certainly engaged with at a policy development level, at the working levels of the government, where a lot of things get done. I guess, these days, working capital, there's two key private members' bills I'll touch on later, Bill 234 and Bill 244, with farm debt levels being high, making sure that we're trying to return as much money, keep as much money rather in farmers' pockets as we possibly can. Environment sustainability, obviously, this government is very focused on this, particularly around emissions. Comes out of a tailpipe, a huge concern for this government. And Environment and Climate Change Canada, ECCC, very prominent, right? They've never had this sort of role funding. We joke that they're, essential agency for agriculture now. Transportation, of course, whenever transportation's in the fore, it's usually not a good thing. We rely on, we need reliable, transparent supply chains, particularly rail and the grain value chain system. It's kind of the area of instability. When we look at 90% of canola being exported, 7 out of 10 tons of prairie-based grains and oilseed ending up through the Port of Vancouver. Canola having to travel on average about 1,500 kilometers from farm gate to tidewater to be in export position. We need rail. We do not want to see farmers being told they can't deliver their grain because the elevator's full, because that means farmers don't get paid and they have bills, they have responsibilities, and they need that liquidity. Of course, innovation, access to crop protection products through PMRA and their transformation agenda, which does have some of us concerned from maintaining a strong risk-based approach, avoiding going down the path of the European Union on their precautionary hazard-based approach. I do not believe the EU is analogous to Canadian agriculture production. We should be looking to the US and Australia and Argentina and others when it comes to agriculture policy. Plant breeding innovation, of course, how new seed varieties are regulated. We want to see varieties get R&D come to Canada, investments in Canada, and canola farmers having more options for the canola seed that they plant in their fields. And of course, fertilizer. We all know the federal government is discussing a reduction of emissions. It's voluntary at this point. But certainly concerns when we look at absolute reduction versus intensity, becoming more efficient, producing more using less. When you just start from the vantage point of absolute reduction, it makes it for a more difficult conversation as opposed to looking to become more efficient and then measuring the reductions that we get by being more efficient while producing more Canadian food. Trade is, of course, the perennial file, with 90% of it being exported. We exported $13.7 billion of the canola in 2021. So we're looking at trade, market access, market diversification. 80% of our exports still go to 5 markets, so always looking for new markets. And then, of course, business risk management and the next policy framework, which is now known as Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership, or SCAP. Unfortunately, SCAP will be something that we're saying for the next 5 years. Again, I could go on, but those are some of the key ones. So what's the current state of play in Ottawa? I get asked this a lot. Minority government, so no one party has enough votes to get anything across the finish line. There's provides both opportunities and threats. Opportunity-wise, there's opposition day motions, order paper questions. All the opposition parties are very important. Their perspective is very important. In a majority government, a strong majority government, there's far less tools for those of us in the advocacy space, but in opposition to kind of stop, deflect, change, course correct, whatever it might be. We have the Liberal and NDP supply and confidence agreement, which means that on matters of confidence, the NDP will have agreed to vote with the Liberals. That agreement's only as good for as long as the NDP choose to keep that in play. But that means that anything financial, so approval of the budget, supplementary estimates, or anything the government deems are matters of confidence, if they're voted on in the House of Commons and you don't have a majority of votes, it triggers an election. The Governor General dissolves Parliament and calls a general election. However, I think we have observed that the NDP, in light of that, are looking to differentiate themselves from the government on other policies, like agriculture. And that's an opportunity for us to work with the NDP as the third opposition party. We have a new Conservative leader, obviously Pierre Poilievre came in, huge majority on the first ballot, sent a clear message, and then he recently announced his shadow cabinet, so they mirror, not fully, because there are shadow cabinet members that don't have a commensurate minister, but it really highlights his priorities, who he feels are kind of his top brass, but looking at, if you form government, this is potentially people in cabinet, a large group, one of the biggest that probably ever. But the one thing I do also reflect on is that the advocacy and lobbying, like agriculture, it's a business about relationships and about individual people. And I know when you see question period or the rhetoric, it's very hard to imagine constructive dialogue happening. But I can say that the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food is likely the most constructive, nonpartisan, results-oriented committee that we have in the House of Commons, with some great folks around that table. I can't go through all 10 members, but fantastic chair and Liberal MP Cody Boyce from Nova Scotia, rather. Really sets a tone of working together and constructive. Parliamentary Secretary Francis Drouin from just outside Ottawa here is a champion of agriculture, certainly, and both grains and oilseeds and supply management, which are prominent in his riding. Can't say enough about our shadow minister for agriculture and agri-food, John Barlow. Certainly happy to see Warren Steinley now join as associate minister from Saskatchewan, and Richard LaHoo from Quebec stay on as associate minister of agriculture. Again, just folks that have a deep understanding and appreciation for agriculture and want to be on the file. NDP agriculture critic Yves Perron is a fantastic critic, very willing to work, to collaborate, to discuss, to have meaningful conversations on things that impact Quebec, but also on prairie-based agriculture. He certainly has shown a lot of interest and willingness to engage. And then NDP agriculture critic Alistair McGregor from Vancouver Island, who I think has moved that party's agriculture policy further than any other critic that I've ever had the opportunity to engage with since my career, both private and when I was a political staffer. Very pragmatic. But I guess what I'm just trying to highlight is that there are very pragmatic people from all parties that we can engage with in agriculture. And there are those that do care, that want to be on this file. And it's a relationship business, I said earlier. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention in the Senate, there are many champions, but our Senate agriculture champion being the Honorable Rob Black from Ontario, the chair of the Senate Standing Committee on Agriculture and Forestry. That's really why my Senator Black is there. I'd be remiss if I didn't give him a shout out. So day to day, what do we do? Again, we're based kind of steps from Parliament Hill, so we spend a lot of our time walking over the Hill, engaging directly, lobbying directly with parliamentarians. Those meetings all have to be registered with the Commissioner for Lobbying by the 15th of each month by subject matter and who we communicated with. Lobbyists have to be registered to display any public offices you previously held, or if there's any designated public offices you held. We spend our day working with partners. We're here, we call Grains HQ. There's 6 national associations in this space. Work directly with them. Get into a bit later, but it's so important that we collaborate and focus on what unites us rather than what divides us. Agriculture is so easily divided, and the more we stand together, I think the better it is for us, for our organizations, and ultimately for our farmers, our ranchers, our producers across Canada. We spend a lot of our time crafting advocacy materials, right? Having a conversation is really important, but you also need something that could be sent electronically. So this is our Growing Canadian Prosperity brochure. We update annually: economic impact, policy priorities, growth opportunities. That's sort of our standard fare. But also reflect, we just had our board and members in town in Ottawa last week for a federal lobby day on Parliament Hill, all day Tuesday, something like 24 meetings, there were more than 30 parliamentarians. And to do that, we crafted a new piece, which is our leave behind, which focused on sort of 3 buckets and the tools for sustainable growth that canola farmers need. So that we spent a lot of time doing that. Participating submissions, consultations, roundtable meetings, you get it. Lobbying is not typically something that's done by Zoom. It has been during the pandemic, and we're hoping to see a bit of a course correction as Ottawa has gotten very crowded, as the ease of accessing parliamentarians via Zoom is good in some regards, but it's also really watered down and diluted the messages for those of us that are based in Ottawa and whose organizations spend resources to make sure they have a voice. Committee appearances, we testify at committees, and of course the reception circuit is part of it. Again, this is a social, relationship-based business. So maybe the last couple minutes, I'll just touch on our approach. So the 5 Ps of advocacy, we call it. 1, persistence, have to be there day in and day out telling your story, or someone else will tell it for you. Ottawa is an echo chamber, and absence of a voice can lead to decisions being made on your behalf. So really encourage groups to get out here, have farmers tell your story, but coordinate it, making sure you're talking to your national organizations and work through them. There's no silver bullet, so we have to be there day in and day out, right? You never know when something you say sticks or helps move the needle. Excuse me. Second, around policy prioritization. We've got a laundry list of demands, right? And rightfully so. But we have to be able to distill that down into a few key policy objectives and be able to communicate to parliamentarians why that's important, why they should care, how they can take action. So a 30-minute meeting for our board on the Hill, we had 3 buckets. We had transportation, we had innovation, and working capital. You can't have 10 demands in a 30-minute meeting. You simply won't get anywhere. It's not an easy exercise to do, but it is important that you go through and determine what's front burner, what's back burner, what's back in the fridge, what do we put on ice for now. Doesn't mean they're not important. So I always look at it from a perspective of everything's a high priority, but what's a high urgency? And you have to be able to sort of identify the high priority, high urgency, and the timelines that mean that's what you're advancing. It sounds obvious, but it's difficult. Partnerships, I said, it's tough to go it alone. I mean, you go to talk to a member of parliament about something, one of the first things they're going to ask is, what does everyone else think about this? Who else believes this? If it's just you as an organization, if it's such a good idea, why don't others agree? So again, we spent a lot of time trying to present that united front, focusing on what unites us, working with other national farm groups and organizations outside of of the agriculture sector. Political realities, there's no sense arguing with the ocean about the tides. There are certain things that you just have to be able to understand, accept, move on. When there's certain political realities, there's certain kind of unmovable objects. There's really no point banging your head against the wall or railing against. People say you need to stand up and be louder and be direct. Advocacy and lobbying and policy development is about compromise, as is your day-to-day dealings with your neighbors, your family, your friends, your input suppliers, your landlords, your lease, whoever's leasing your land. It is about compromise, right? in public opinion, we have to understand what Canadians think, what are big issues. We know farmers poll well. Farmer issues are often accepted by Canadians as important. So those are the 5 Ps. Lastly, my last 30 seconds, I do just want to say it's easy to be cynical, as I said, but we've had some major wins. There was improvements in 2022 to BRM and agri-stability. Bill 234 on-farm exemption from carbon pricing for natural gas and propane is now at 3rd reading in the House of Commons. Bill 244 on right to repair, allowing farmers more competition, hopefully drive down prices so they can determine who diagnose, repair, and maintains their farm equipment. Market access to China for canola was reinstated. We got Health Canada's guidance on plant breeding innovation, and we're waiting on CFIA's guidance. And then just last Friday, the Prime Minister announced funding for an Indo-Pacific Trade Diversification Office, a long ask of agriculture to get technical resources on the ground in that part of the world, a huge middle class, huge demand for our agriculture products. I'll pause there. Again, wish you was with you in person. Look forward to hearing how the panel discussion went, and I'll kick it back over to you, Dean. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to our digital Dave that was not able to be here today. I always appreciate Dave's perspective. So I sit in the prairies. I look west, or I look east from the west and shake my head or shake my fist at whatever's coming out of Ottawa. Dave sits in the east and looks west back at the prairies. We're on the same organization. We're both CCGA, same team, same objective, same goal, but a different perspective. And sometimes Dave's perspective gives me pause to stop and think about my own. It's easy to sit in the prairies and think one way, but we have to remember that message has to resonate in Ottawa as well. So I really enjoyed Dave's comments. It's too bad he couldn't be here for the discussion, the question and answer after, but he did give me some ideas of answers he might give for later. So thank you again to Dave. So up next, we have Janice Tranberg. She's the president and CEO of the Alberta and National Cattle Feeders Association. In her role as president and CEO, Janice advocates for cattle feeders on a broad range of policies and economic issues impacting the competitiveness of beef production in Alberta and Canada. Previously, Janice was executive director of SAS Canola, assistant deputy minister of regulatory and innovation for the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture, vice president of Western Canada CropLife Canada, and communications and regulatory affairs director with AgWest Bio. So with that, Janice, I would say the podium is yours, but maybe the chair is yours.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks. I'm just going to sit to hopefully everybody can hear me. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this conference. Addressing the elephant in the room. When I was young, I was in a car accident, broke my hip, and years later now I had to get it replaced. But this conference is really important. So I really wanted to make the effort to come, so thank you. And thanks to my other panelists. We've worked together in the past quite a few times, and I think I hope that that's something that you're going to get out of the talk today, is how important the building those relationships really are. Agriculture is a very diverse industry. I don't need to tell you guys that. And earlier this summer, I had dinner with a senator. I was quite fortunate to be invited. And he said, you guys need to understand, I have people come into my office every day. And they come in and they talk and they bring their messages, and I write down notes, and then we stand up and we get a photo together, and then they leave. And then the next group comes in and they do the same thing. By the end of the day, I've kind of forgotten what's been asked. So you guys collectively need to come together and have a message. So, I thought about this for quite a while afterwards, and I'm going to make an analogy to a doctor. So a bone doctor coming in would probably have a different message than a diabetes specialist, for example. So agriculture is as diverse, canola versus cattle. But at the same time, where we can get those common messages, I think it's really important that we do. And we've had a couple great wins this year. Dave commented on some of them, the PMRA Act, we all got together on that. Fertilizer emissions reductions, the next policy framework, and BRM. So, where we have been able to, we've got together. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about some issues that we've been dealing with and how we sort of developed our message to get our point across. So Alberta hosts about 70% of Canada's fed cattle industry, and feed costs are our number one input cost, other than purchasing the cattle, of course. But with the drought in 2021, there became a real shortage of feed, and export market prices, as I'm sure many of you know, went up very high, so that made it even harder for us to get feed. Barley prices in Lethbridge hit an all-time high in January. They were $445 a ton, and corn imports from the US just rose drastically. I'll give you an example. In 2020, we had about 600 train loads of corn that came in. In 2021, that went up to 8,000 train loads, and we've easily doubled that in 2022. But the perspective is from the rail companies. They're used to this east-west movement, right? They're moving their grain to the port. They're not as used to the north-south movement. So that caused some issues. And when we first started to see that there might be shortages, that was in the fall last year. And so we thought, okay, proactively, let's start getting our message out. Let's start building some messages to government. Let's let them know that these problems are, potentially happening. And so we reached out proactively. Nobody took us terribly seriously, if I'd be honest. But then in December and January, when real shortages started to happen, I was getting calls on a regular basis from pretty panicked members and farmers who were saying, I literally have 1 to 2 weeks of feed left in my bin. What am I going to do? And I want to remind you that in Alberta, feedlot capacity is about 1.5 million head of cattle. So when you run out of feed, that's pretty significant, right? So they were really quite panicked. So, I think that our proactive engagement ahead of time really served us well. We had, and some of these shortages were, we had COVID sicknesses, so trains weren't running, and we had cold weather, so trains weren't running, and there were all of these different things. So we immediately reached out to CP Rail, and we were able to have some good conversations because we had been reaching out to them ahead of time, so they already kind of knew we had built that relationship. They said that they would work with their suppliers to try to get the point across that feed was priority. But again, you have to remember what really is the CP Rail's priority. It's getting their grain to the port, right? And what really is the priority of the grain companies? It's getting their contracts filled and their export markets filled. So, we knew that we had to get the government involved. We knew that there was a potential that we would have to have them help us push the priority on this. What we did was we decided that we would use the media. We would use the media to really get our story out, to talk about, what the issue was. So in about 1 to 2 weeks' time, we had 20 different media interviews. And how we did that, and the important part was we put the farmers up front. Because they're really the ones who were getting impacted by this, right? And they were the ones who had the story. And they were the ones that the media were interested in and the public was interested in. So we also then, as staff, we had a lot of meetings. We briefed the agriculture minister. We went to, as Dave said, we went to the Ag Standing Committee. We went to the critic. We went to our provinces. We did, as many different people as we could meet with, the PMO's office. So by late January, trains were moving pretty good. We had about 10 to 11 trains per week coming in, and we thought, great, we're going to build back up our reserves. We're good. Well, then came along the vaccine mandate for truckers and the border closure. And this really, so a lot of our feed was coming up on rail, but a lot of it was also coming up on trucks. So that impeded the movement of feed coming up. It impeded the movement of cattle going down south because our processors were backed up. We were trying to get as many cattle processed as we possibly could because we didn't have feed for them, right? So then the processors were backed up. We had to get live cattle down. And then the processors, they also had to get boxed beef down because they couldn't process more cattle because their freezers were full. So we really needed to get this movement of through the border. So we continued to do what we had done before. We worked with all our governments, we met with them, but we focused much more on a contingency plan because that was a really politically charged issue, right? So our main focus was, what's the contingency plan? How are we going to get these trucks moving? So we met regularly with CFIA, we met with the Cross-Border Service Agency, we met with Transport Canada, we had weekly calls, and again, if there's anything good that came out of that, there was a cross-border U.S.-Canada protocol for moving livestock across border in emergency situations. So, never let a good crisis go to waste. We were able to get something out of that. So again, we just thought we had gotten somewhere, and we heard that the CP Rail Teamsters Union was going to go on strike. So again, immediate action. We got on the phone. This is where we really built some partnerships. We worked with, the national cattle feeders, of course. We worked with the Canadian Cattle Association. We worked with, with the Western Grain Elevators Association. Anyone that we could find who had a common cause with us, we reached out with them. We met with them. And we really kind of pushed it on the animal welfare issue because I think that's where we had a leg to stand on, right? So what our asks were, we were asking that CP Rail go into collective bargaining and get this strike. Maybe it wouldn't even come to play or get it fast. And that in the end, we wanted to make railways an essential service because really in Canada, and especially Western Canada, we almost have a monopoly. It's really CP Rail is our main line that we deal with. Was mentioned MP Blah, who is the chair of the Standing Committee for Agriculture. He invited us to come to Ottawa and do a press release on the Hill. So again, that was part of that relationship that we were able to build. So we got onto the Hill and gave that. And so as a result of this and everyone's actions too, Minister O'Regan, he sent a team of conciliators in. They worked with the union and with CP Rail, and as we know, the strike was very short-lived. So, whew. But I think what I'm trying to say in this real story is I think there's some real lessons to learn on advocacy. So the first one is building your relationships ahead of time is really key, because then when rubber hits the road, you know who to go to and they know you. You've already built that relationship. So I think that's really key. It's really important that farmers be the face of the issue, particularly when you're talking media and you're talking politicians. They're the ones who are living it. Staff, we can build the relationships, we can build the key messages, we can get the media, we can pull everybody together, the stakeholders, but when it comes to the media and the politicians, they want to talk to you. They want the face of the farmer. And it's important too that when you are talking, you're sharing it in a story. Make it personal. How does it affect you today? You've got to adapt your message to your audience. So as I said, when we were talking to the media, we were telling a different story than when we were talking to politicians or when we were talking to the WGEA. You've got to adapt that story, and you've got to make it so that it achieves what they want, not just what you want, but where's that common ground? How are they going to find success out of it, as well as you? And then find your allies, and that's not always ones that are obvious. I mean, who thought that cattle feeders were going to, work with grain elevators, or CP Rail for that matter? So, and those relationships, we've actually kept them up, and they've come in handy more often than not. So build those relationships. So I hope this story sort of gives you sort of an example of how we've done things. I hope it encourages you to be part of the advocacy, because we have so many issues, and I think that you're such an important part of telling that story. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Janice. You've highlighted several things there that came up in conversation numerous times. The importance of agriculture to work together. You're talking about transportation issues. Well, at canola growers, we talk about transportation all the time. It's the same issue, different faces, but the same issue. And that farmer messaging, Dave Carey tells us many times, it's easy to dispute facts, but it's harder to dispute someone's live reality, how they're living it. And when we meet with the parliamentarians, they might not remember what we said, but they do remember how we made them feel. And that's where that farmer focus, our passion comes through in our messaging. So thank you. Our next panelist is Mr. Jeff Nielsen. So Jeff is a farmer from here in Alberta near Olds. He is the third generation to farm on his land with his partner Tim Holman. Their 1,200-acre farm currently produces wheat, barley, and canola. Jeff has been a strong advocate for agriculture and has served the community by participating in farm associations and agriculture boards, including being the chair of the Grain Growers of Canada, the United Grain Growers, Agricor United, Western Barley Growers Association, the Canadian Wheat Board, the Western Grains Research Foundation, and Alberta Barley Commission. Now you'll notice I had to read that. I couldn't memorize all of those. I think we had a missed opportunity here. We could have had them just up as their acronyms on the board. A skill testing question for the audience. The first table to get them all right gets a prize. But anyway, thank you, Jeff. The podium's yours.
Well, thank you, Dean, and thank you, Janice. I really appreciate those comments, and same with Dave. A lot of my comments are going to resonate that, and I want to thank everybody for being here today, and it's great to see a lot of people, and shout out to Olds College. I've spoken to their, where's Larry? He's over there. I've spoken to Larry's class for several times. Larry's dragged me in and brought back some memories that sometimes you don't want to think about, but he's got me changed to more advocacy and policy now, so I'm not dwelling in the past. I want to talk a little bit more about some personal examples and stuff on ag policy, how it's affected me, and where I think we can all work together, as some of the comments already have gone to. A lot of people think ag policy, that's kind of dull, it's kind of boring. It's time consuming. It can be extended. I'm going to give you an example in a minute of an ag policy that Western Canadian farmers faced for 60, 70 years before it finally got changed. And thinking of that, you know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a grain farmer. We had cattle and that, but I wanted to be a grain farmer. And I spotted a 5-acre chunk of land that Dad had in the corner that he kind of farmed by itself. And I said, I want that 5 acres. And I think I was only 10. And I said, well, I just want it. I want the crop. I don't want to pay for it. So come harvest time, Dad says, okay, well, there's the crop, but I'm going to give you the initial payment now, and I'll give you final payment later. And I didn't really like that idea. It took me a while, but he did probably pay me in full about a week later. But yeah, the whole idea of waiting for my paycheck at 10 years old wasn't something I wasn't aware of yet, put it that way. So that was an ag policy that was in place. When I turned 16, I rented my first quarter section. I had to get permission. I had to get my dad to sign my permit book, the Canadian Wheat Board permit book. So back then you had to have permission to sell your grain, your wheat and your barley. So that was kind of a, what the heck is this? So something I hadn't quite understood fully yet either. So I kind of dealt with it. Well, we all had to deal with it, and you move on. At the time, we sold grain to United Grain Growers. It was a farmer-directed company, and it was a little more forward-thinking and got involved in the member advisor group with it. So it was setting policy. You go to the annual conventions, and you would debate. You would bring resolutions to the floor, and you debate them, and you present the resolutions to the directors. The directors would then consider them going forward. I got more and more involved in that and was actually elected to the board of directors of United Grain Growers. And just a little quick note there, one of my first meetings, I found out that you're not a farmer anymore when you're sitting on a corporate board of directors. You're a corporate board director. You got to take your hat off, throw it in the corner, and forget about what's important to your farm. You got to think what's important for that corporation, and the same be if you're on Cattlemen or CCJ. You got to think what's important for that organization. You have an issue on your farm, you have to put aside. You have to think for the betterment of the organization. So it's kind of a steep learning curve being a director of EGG. I went on to Agricor United as well, and actually was sitting at the board table when we got the phone call that SAS Weepo was launching the hostile takeover bid on us. And we did our fiduciary duties when we couldn't fight anymore, and we ensured that our shareholders received fair compensation for the sale of Agricor United to SAS Pool. I got involved in Western Barley Growers Association. That was a group that was highly involved in ag policy. It, along with the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association, were farmer-driven and highly engaged in ag policy. Naturally, at that time, we had, bad choice of words, a common enemy. But we were also engaged in working on business management programs, working for barley development and research. We wanted to do more with the cattle sector. We wanted to make sure we had a vibrant value-added sector. We wanted to ensure our maltsters, our malting industry was growing. So Western Barley Growers was key in doing that, but it also got me engaged with going places. And with the Alberta government support, we started going to the Doha round of World Trade Organization meetings, and we went to Geneva several times. The first trip we went with the Alberta government support and with their team. They had an office in Geneva. We went to other countries to support the message that we needed freer trade. As Dave mentioned earlier, 90% of Canadian ag is dependent on free trade, or on international markets, exports, so we needed that. We were a group of 7 or 8 farmers from across Western Canada, and we were keeners. We got up to the first night we were there, we got up to the debrief we had at the Canadian Mission, and our senior trade negotiator, Steve Verhoel, who just recently retired, looks at us and says, "We're on the front row, we're keeners. Who are you guys?" And we said, "We're grain farmers." And he says, "What? Grain farmers? What the heck are you doing here for? I've never seen you before." And so we had a great chat, but he was quite happy that the grain sector had finally shown up. We were represented there through the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, but once again, I think you've heard the message already, it was key to actually have farmers there, actual producers there. So it was an exciting time. The Doha rounds really didn't go anywhere, but yeah, Canada has linked many free trade agreements and are continuing on trade agreements going forward. So it's great to see that the voices of farmers are heard and that we have been growing our trade agreements. A little back closer to home, it took till August 1st of 2012 before we actually had what we call marketing freedom on the grain sector in Western Canada. It was a long fight. There's farmers that went to jail. Farmers had large financial penalties brought onto them. But at the end, we've seen for the last 10 years what I say a large growth and success in the grain sector. We've seen reinvestment in value added. We've seen investment in grain elevators. We thought grain elevators were going to disappear off the Western prairies. The consolidation was getting quite tight. Now we're seeing growth. We're seeing steady incline on grain production. We took a hit last year, probably a bit of hit this year, but over the last 10 years, grain production has gone steadily up. So that's good, and we're dependent once again on export. So the railway question comes back into concern too, how important having our railways working for us. At the time when we, not just thinking of marketing freedom, but we look at the groups that were getting engaged, not just CCJ, but at the time Grain Growers Canada was formed in 2000 by a group of farmers that went from east to west to get farm associations engaged, that they wanted to have the grain, oilseed, and pulse producer voice in Ottawa on a full-time basis. As Dave made it clear, you need to have that presence. And we're in the same office as Dave. Grain Growers Canada is in the same office, Grains Central, I think it's called. I can't think of the name right now. But it's great to have that presence there. And as mentioned, Janice and Dave mentioned the cooperation. You build coalition with other groups. Other groups you may not think you have a friend with. For the longest time, you think we were at odds with some groups, and now you work together on these coalitions, like livestock, and not really at odds or anything like that, but we have on certain files, we can build a strong coalition. Canadian Federation of Agriculture, we can build strong coalitions, especially when it comes to business management programs with them. And most recently, building a strong coalition with supply management sectors when it comes to the Agriculture Carbon Alliance, where we're trying to have that common message to ensure that we do see, hopefully, this latest private members bill pass, and we see the relief we need on the carbon issue. And just a little bit of that, I was greatly involved in the last private members bill that was in the last session of Parliament, introduced by MP Philip Lawrence. And we did work hard. It was concentrated effort. We had the Standing Committee on Agriculture, or the House of Commons Committee on Agriculture, really engaged in it and really supportive. We worked with the NDP. We worked with the Green Party. They understood our message. They understood where we were. And and we had the Senate. The Senate was mentioned. The amount of work that getting these senators engaged and get them more aware, and they're actually playing an active role now. So we were there right at the cusp of having that win, yet the election was called, and that died on the order paper. The current bill, it's progressing, as Dave mentioned, it's at third reading. It's in the Senate right now, I believe. It has a very strong chance. It doesn't have the support of the Liberal Party, but it has enough support from the other parties that it could become law. The only thing that could derail that is if the Prime Minister calls an election. So hopefully in the next period of time, we don't see that happen. So you're thinking of the governments are listening. Being there, as Dave and Janice would say, you have to, as I met my ball cap when I was at my first board meeting with the United Grain Growers, throw your ball cap to the side. And the same thing you had to put your ideals when you go to meet, say, with somebody that you don't understand their political position or you don't agree with their political position. You're going in there nonpartisan. You have to maintain that focus. You can let them rant and rave. They will at times. You go into a lobby group, they will give you their peace of mind first. But then, as Dave mentioned, you go in there with your 3 ideas. You can't go in with more than 3 because their attention span is kind of short. But you have to focus on that, and once again, the common message. You keep that common message going, whether it's CCA going in this week, maybe grain growers going in next week, or it be prairie oak growers going the week later, or whoever. So you need to keep that common message and keep it going. And work not just with the MPs, but work with the bureaucrats, work with the chief of staffs of the ministers, work with the senior bureaucrats, the director generals of all the divisions. It's key to engage them because then you're engaging the staff that are actually writing all the programs or writing all the ideas for the minister to review. So it's great to see all that cooperation. Thinking about here in Alberta, you have the 4 crop commissions. In 2015, when the NDP came to power, those 4 crop commissions came together really fast because they knew that the NDP was a little lax on ag platforms or ag knowledge. So they went in there, they got into the offices, they went in there to help work with them. They didn't go in there to preach, they didn't go in there and tell them what to do. They went in there and tell them, okay, this is who we are, this is how we're representing our sector of agriculture, this is where we can see where we can work with each other and build those coalitions. And that's been proven a great success, and Team Alberta is now growing to having more organizations engaged in it. So and other provinces have done the same thing. So it's really key to build that relationship with whoever you're talking to and maintain it. Governments come and go. It's always a challenge. When the Liberals came into power, I was still with grain growers. You had to focus on a whole new group of people again. You got new MPs who know nothing, literally. When you look at 2% of the population that's involved in agriculture in Canada, you have to restart again. So it's we seem to be chasing our tail, running in circles when we're on these policy, on our lobby missions, because we're always facing these new challenges. But we have to look at our core values and keep them in the forefront. So, like some of the hot files that we're all talked about, like a hot topic can happen so fast and so quick. Yet there's still all the basis things we're working on. Carbon right now is a hot topic. The climate naturally is a hot topic. We are the first. We are the stewards of our land. We know what we're doing as ag producers. We need to encourage our message going forward. But we can't forget on the files that we still have to work on. The railroad issue. It's constantly changing. PMRA. There's always a risk there. It's taxation. Lots of challenges, areas that we're always focused on, and we're always working on the background on behalf of farmers in ag policy. So then ag policy has been gotten more engaged, is getting more diverse, equality, and notably mental health is on the forefront as well, and working for us in the future. We need more at the table, though. Naturally, our associations are always looking for new members. Get involved. If you're a grain farmer or livestock producer, you're paying levy somehow, somewhere. Get involved with your associations. Go to your AGMs. Go to your regional meetings. Get interested. If you want to be a delegate, be a delegate. It doesn't mean you have to jump on the board, but get engaged, because we need the help. We need the support. And it's needed for our sector here. So in closing, that's just what I'll say. Get involved. Canadian agriculture needs it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeff. As you're going through all of those experiences, I can't help but think how much of your time you donated to the industry, sitting in airport security and outside of offices waiting to meet with people for that 15 minutes to potentially have an impact could mean a day of travel on your half. So thank you for your time and commitment. So that's the end of our presentations. We have a bunch of questions now to follow up on. So I guess our first question I'll put to the panel. In agriculture, we often work in silos, yet today I heard our panel members provide examples about how we are collaborating on agriculture policy issues across sectors and even across the value chain. Could each of you give your perspective on why this is changing and why it is important for us to collaborate more effectively on agriculture policy issues?
You want me to start?
Sure.
Well, you know, the story I told about the senator, that kind of outlines it right there. Our government our Liberal government, our federal government, is not certainly focused on agriculture. If we combine agriculture collectively, we're a big player, and I think we need to remind them of that. And the importance, again, silver lining, COVID, the war in Ukraine, I think has put a little bit more of a face on agriculture than we had prior to this. So we have this now as an opportunity. And if we can come together with some of our messages, then I think that's the opportunity that we need to take, and we can go further. Agriculture has a problem. We sometimes don't agree with each other. Price of grain, when prices of grain are high, that's really great for a grain farmer and not so great for a cattle feeder, but I think that's the challenge, is how do we rise above that, find those common messages and take those together, because if we're fighting internally, we don't stand a chance, particularly with our federal government. So I really do think we need to find that common ground and move those messages forward.
Yeah, messaging is priority there. You have to be a common thing. As Dave mentioned, you go on a lobby trip, you have 3 messages at the most, and they may be the current ones right now, but we all know in the background, all our associations are still working on the BRM files, working on the transportation files, working on this. But it's being cornered into that silo again by a hot topic, having an NGO come out with something that gets all the media attention, that forces us to be, instead of being on the proactive side that we're trying to be on all the time, we get into that reactive side, and then we get cornered into that silo. And that's where we got to try to keep what's the best word for it? Keep our distance and our focus on the bigger picture rather than being cornered.
I know if Dave were here, his thoughts were the state is changing because it has to. We can't keep trying the same tactics over and over again. And if we can't work together as agriculture or farm groups, how can we expect largely urban and suburban parliamentarians to know what they should do? If one ag group's over here and another ag group's over here, how is the MP who doesn't know anything about either topic know what to do? But there will be an NGO coming with a very clear message against both groups, and that will be easier for the MP to rationalize and understand. So that is the risk there in not focusing on what unites us. If we focus on what unites us rather than what divides us, and carve out those sensitive issues like trade, we can achieve great things on the 90% of things that we do agree upon. So my next question is that each of you gave examples of ag policy issues that you've worked on. Can you talk about one or two ag policy issues that you think are most impacting agriculture today?
You can go
I'll
first.
go
this time.
first. Well, I kind of touched on a couple, like when we look at the hot topics of the day, the carbon tax issue, and when we look at probably what hit agriculture kind of blindsided was the new fertilizer or the misinformation or confusion over how the government, who really still hasn't come out to explain what they're doing yet on nitrous emissions. It's confusing. I know Dave and those in Ottawa are probably every day trying to find more and more clarity on that issue. We get caught up. That's kind of one of those silos we're getting backed into on that, because we're trying to do more work and trying to figure out where we have to go ahead. But I'm thinking some of the work that the groups have done with, say, with PMRA and just trying to encourage them to use more sound science or follow the science when it comes to review of some of the chemicals, some of the tools we have in our toolbox, rather than listening to the NGOs. I think we have seen some really good progress in some areas.
Definitely the environment's a moving target. It seems to change on a daily basis from, carbon credits and methane and everything else. So that's a big one. But the one I wanted to touch on is labor. We've had such a hard time in the beef industry. I'll say again, that's who I represent, so that's my example. But getting people to work in the processing plants, it's getting people to work on feedlots. You're working in 40+ weather and -40 weather. It really doesn't matter what the temperature is, whether you're in a snowstorm. They still need to drink water. You got to keep those water bins clear, and they still need to get feed, and all of those different things. People live in urban centers. Even immigration, where do they come when they come into Canada? They come into the big centers. That's where they find common ground. That's where they find their relatives, their friends who have moved before them. They don't want to go into rural centers. As parents, what are you doing? Are you encouraging your kids to work on the farm, or are you encouraging them to go out and get a degree and do something big? But we still need those general laborers, right? We still need all of that stuff. So how do we make sure that we have a good labor force? And unfortunately, whether we like it or not, temporary foreign workers has been the way that we've had to fill those jobs. But government, seeing high inflation rates, seeing high unemployment rates, they don't want to bring in temporary foreign workers. They want to get jobs for their people that don't have jobs. So how do you make them understand that Canadians don't necessarily want these jobs? And I'm not trying to be so negative. I mean, some are, and succession planning and farming is so important. But to get those general labor jobs, we really do need temporary foreign workers. We need immigration. And that's been a bit of an uphill battle, I think, getting governments to understand that.
So, throwing in Dave's perspective from Ottawa, there was a point in time with this federal government that economic impact and exports were not the measurables being used. It was all about the greenhouse gas emissions. While that still figures prominently, I do think we're seeing more focus on monetary policy and global food security, and there's now getting to be some space to talk about agriculture and its role in the Canadian economy. So my next question for you. Farmers are often busy operating our farms, and we sometimes forget how policy issues impact our farms short and long term. Can each of you share why you think it's important for farmers to be knowledgeable about the ag policy issues and how these issues can impact the farm gate?
Well, wow. I mean, let's take, there's so many examples. The shortage of issues, I'll have a job for a while. I think let's take methane as an example. So we know, in the fed cattle industry, that the main way that we're going to get reduce methane emissions is through feed additives. But we don't have a regulatory pathway. We've got some cool products that are wanting to go through our regulatory pathway, and we're being told that it's going to take 2 years just to get them through the queue. These are products that have been approved in Brazil and in Europe, like really, all over the world. So why has Canada put up so many barriers? And yet, on the other side, they're saying, oh, you've got to reduce your methane emissions and you've got to do this. So I think that where we've been impactful is having farmers stand up and say, you're carbon taxing us. You're trying to make us do reduced emissions. We're doing, you haven't even recognized that we've done all of these things already on our sustainability on our farm, and you haven't given us any credit for that. So I can stand up there and say that, sure, but it's you guys. You have to be the ones and say, look at this I'm barely making it. My inputs, this is my input costs, this is my transportation costs, this is all of these things. And so again, as you said it for Dave, it's that story. When you go in, I can list a number of facts and walk out and they're going to forget it all. But when you go in and tell them the story and tell them how, you want to, you've been on this farm, you're the 5th generation on this farm, and this is what you're having to do to make a living, that's what's impactful. So I really think it's important that, it is time, it is effort away from being on your farm, but it's really important. And it's also really rewarding. Like, it can be fun. You can make some really great relationships. So it's not all work. There's fun too.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I'll just maybe go back to the grassroots when I meant to comment about levies and checkoff dollars is, if you're seeing that on your check, you can get a refund. Most of the organizations, it's a refundable levy. But the thing is, you got to look at what all that money is going for. It's going for helping the national associations do the work in Ottawa. It's helping send that team to Ottawa or to wherever it's needed. But it's also working on the research side, it's working on the environment side, it's working on the tax side, it's working on all that. So I kind of go back to grassroots. I says, everybody here needs to get, if they're not getting involved in it now, get more involved in it and build it from there and encourage your leaders and help change the leadership too. Like, some of us have had a good time. We want to move on, so.
Well, I think it's important too to know what's coming. Meeting with your MP, your MLA, your municipal government, just to know the changes that are coming so you can try and get in front of them before they're there. Maybe make a course correction as opposed to trying to stop the ship when it's already there. So, absolutely. Today I heard you talk about farmers being directly involved in the advocacy process. Why is it important for farmers to be directly involved in talking with policymakers and their impact on the farm? I think we've covered this several times over now.
Yeah, I guess I'll just go back to the common message. Like, you need to have that common message to resonate over and over again. It's sort of like an info commercial. You hear it often enough, it just kind of hangs in your head. But that with our politicians, and like I said, some of them have a very short attention span, you have to keep on refocusing that. Because they're getting targeted, like you mentioned in your comment about the senator. They got 10 meetings a day. They got 10 different people, 10 different things. They have a lobbyist from CN there probably 5 times a month. Some of these groups that have strong lobby groups are in the faces of these politicians constantly. For us on the ag side to get in there, we have to be more focused and more resonate with our message that's clear and it's a common message.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll just be quick and, also remember from their perspective, what are they trying to achieve? And the harsh reality is a lot of them are pretty focused on getting reelected in a couple of years, right? So especially if you're their constituents, they want to talk to you, they want to make time. So if it's your MP, your MLA, they're going to want to hear from you. So I remember that too. You've got some leverage, and you can go in there. And like I said, I don't think I've ever heard of an MP or an MLA refusing to meet with one of their constituents, especially if they go to Ottawa. So use that to your advantage.
So I'll maybe phrase this question to you first, Jeff. You've had quite a lot of time, been through quite a few issues. Do you think the rate of change is increasing or decreasing with policy issues? Are they coming faster and taking longer to resolve, or are they coming longer and slower? Is it a glacial change at the government level, or what's your perspective with someone with significant time and many fires to fight?
Well, I mean, that's a key word right there. We're facing more and more fires as things come on. We get things thrown at us faster than we did in the past. We're still working on all these existing files. And yes, it's glacier. When it comes to even the carbon bill, the private members bill, it's still going to be probably a year away before it is recognized as law, if it gets that far. It's just the slow process. But that's the new topics that can take our attention away from us so fast that we have to take our time away, take Dave's time, or take Erin Gowrick's from Graingor's time away from the files that she needs and Dave need to focus on this now, and to get a farmer back down to Ottawa to deal with that while still keeping everything going in the background. They're coming harder and faster, and it's a greater challenge.
Absolutely. Like, like in the last 2 months, I just had a board meeting actually just yesterday, and in the last 2 months I put together a list of the consultations that we gave, pre-budget consultation, methane reduction, ag labor strategy, BRMs. I'm missing a few, I'm sure, but I think there was a list of close to 8 that we had done in the last 2 months. They're just coming fast and furious. So, and sometimes you get successes and sometimes you don't. The front of package labeling is one I'll maybe talk about. I'm sure I hope everybody heard about that. That came up really fast. We had been working with Health Canada on their trans fat labeling for quite a while, and then it went dead. COVID happened and it went totally dead. And then I think everybody after COVID is kind of like, oh, we dropped this file and we dropped that file. All of a sudden we got to move really, really fast. So bang, they said, oh, we're going to put front of package labeling, and ground beef will be part of that, and because it has the high saturated fat. So we had to move really, really fast on that one. We had to, again, sort of the same sort of story. Health Canada, we gave every scientific argument you could imagine to Health Canada as to why it didn't make sense. And they basically said, we don't care, we've made our decision. So we then had to go to the PMO's office, and we had to go to the media, and we had to get a public campaign going, and we had to scream really loud and really fast. We got it changed. So success, yay, celebrate those.
Okay, well, I have one more question here, and then I see some questions popping up from the floor, so I won't belabor this one, but we're all challenged to produce results and show impact. I'm curious, as people who have worked in ag policy for some time, how do you measure progress and the impact of the work that you do? Advocacy, it's more art than science. Measuring political capital is tough, but when you run out of it, how do you prove the null hypothesis that something didn't happen because of your actions?
I'll give it a shot.
Well, it's relationships, right? It's you've built those relationships. So when, like as you said, when an issue rises, they come to you. They're like, oh, we heard about this. What do you think? So and it's about you're getting asked for your opinion, not so much that you have to push your opinion. So it is soft measurements. Occasionally you get a win, like I just said, but it really is soft measurements. But and you have to be patient, because some of the big policy issues, I've been working on them for 20 years.
No, I give hats off to our national organizations that are based in Ottawa, like Grains HQ that Dave and Grain Growers are a part of. It's the ability of them being the go-to group now, to be called on by the senior bureaucrat or by the minister. Well, what is your view on this? So it's taken the whole relationship building, it's taken a great deal of time to get there. And then just getting the farmer in there at the right time, the producer in there at the right time to back that up is to me is a win. If you start seeing light bulbs go off in these people's eyes, you know that you've got a bit of a win going on. So,
thank you. So our first question from the floor: with a new Alberta leader, how does this impact ag in the province?
Again, I'll start. So what I have another board meeting actually next week, so I've been preparing. And what I've been doing this week is I've been going through the mandate letters. So the Premier gives all the ministers a mandate letters of the things that she thinks they need to accomplish. So I've been going to the mandate letters, and I've been pulling out the one or two sentences from each mandate letter that aligns with something that we want. Right? So now that I know what they're mandated to do, and if it aligns with something that we want them to do, now we're going to go in and we're going to meet with them and we're going to talk about that. Because again, they're going to get a win, and hopefully we're going to get a win. So that's the process of how we're going to do it and how we're going to figure out. How will it impact ag in this province? Well, we're going to go into election in the spring. There's just no way around it because she has to call it. And it's going to be a really interesting election. We're just, so what are we going to accomplish in the next few months? Probably not a whole lot, but I think, again, the key is to get, build those relationships now so that hopefully, now my political stripes are coming out. But if we after the next election, we'll be able to hit the ground running and really be able to make some strides. So that would be, I think, my recommendation.
Yeah, I can't add much more to that. I think Team Alberta is probably working with we kept the same ag minister, Minister Horner, which is a benefit. But you're right, Janice. We're looking at election come May. I think there is going to be a lot of things happening. There could be some money tossed around. It's naturally before any election. But
So our next question, how does a primary producer afford the time and expense to be on a provincial or national board?
it's dedication, I'd say, for one thing, and it's leaning on your association that you're representing a lot too. It's the trust and belief your organization has to have you in that position. Whether it's when I was a director for Alberta Barley, they put me forth as the director for grain growers, and I was elected by the membership grain growers. So it's through their support. And yes, you could be called literally 48 hours ahead of time and asked to go to appear at a Senate hearing or a Senate House committee or something like that. So you have to be flexible. And yes, it is consuming. It is a challenging, but you accept these roles, put it that way, and you have to be willing to work within and support.
Yeah, and also realize, you can put as much effort into it as you can afford. So when you start, that doesn't mean that you have to be the chair, and fly to Ottawa all the time. You can start slowly and get involved. Oftentimes there's you can even start by getting on a committee as opposed to right on the board and start to learn a little bit more. So you can pace yourselves and determine how much you can and cannot do. And have those conversations with your other board members, with your chair, with the executive director. And we want good people, so we're going to make any adjustments that we can. And, it's, again, silver lining out of COVID, we now do Zoom a lot more than we used to, right? So, I think we'll make those adjustments, and because, we want good people. We want step up.
Well, and I think from my own experience, you need the support of your family, your employees, the rest of your organization. I don't know how many times my wife has had to bail me out when something goes wrong and I'm gone. Our last board meeting in Ottawa, I had a bin of canola starting to heat. I got the alert on my phone from BinSense, temperature threshold breach. Like, woo, somebody's going to have to deal with this, and I'm on the wrong end of the continent for this today. So luckily my wife is a good sport. She went and dealt with the canola that was starting to heat, but it's not something to take on lightly for sure. So Jeff mentioned mental health advocacy as a way to get involved in policy change. Can you elaborate on that in terms of partnerships within and outside of agriculture?
Well, I think that's been something that we've hidden when it comes to mental health issues, and in the Ag Committee is something that we've seen a lot of, whether COVID brought it on. I think it was already started well before that. We have the groups, and we heard yesterday, like Do More Ag, we had that great presentation late yesterday and stuff like that. So it's something that I think has been evolving. COVID probably could have pushed it kind of over the edge a bit more, but it has to be at the forefront when we do, I think, a lot of this. We have to be considerate of the mental health of our of those involved in advocacy and ag policy. Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. Okay.
Producers have to make decisions that will affect them in years to come. How can they keep up to date with upcoming policy changes to ensure they are aware of these when making decisions, like a new grain dryer just before a carbon tax?
Can we get back to you on that one? Yeah, as we know, policy, especially when ag policy, it may go at a glacier pace, but when it changes, it can change fast. And sometimes it can go a little faster than we want. That's where, with Janice's example, where they jumped right in and they had to do it all court press. Even media actually was your biggest asset when it came to the labeling issue there. So awareness, well, you had the presentation on IT just before this, or tell us there. It's the electronic world now, that TikToks, the Twitters and all that. Like, I think we're a lot more engaged in what's going on, and we know what's going on a lot quicker.
Yeah, the only comment I would make, I mean, your associations, that's a big role. They should be keeping you up to date. So, you know, follow those those newsletters or whatever. Follow Twitter, you know, all of those different things. But the other important thing is also question, right? Because there's lots of trolls out there, and lots of people that will give you this perspective or that perspective. Make sure you do take the time to really think about it and question, and you know, get another opinion. And I think that there's a lot of farm experts out there that are willing to do that. Talk to your association, like give me a call. I take calls all the time, so. Yeah, you know, just, and talk to other farmers, like they're aware too, right? Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. The 30-second wrap-up then. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed our window into ag policy today. Thank you to the panel members. Thank you to Farm Management Canada for hosting this conference. We looked at it through 3 different lenses. I hope you take the message away that ag policy should be supportive to agriculture and not a hindrance. When ag is successful, societies are successful. When agriculture fails, society fails. We look at Sri Lanka, where bad government policy is causing the people of Sri Lanka a world of hurt. So I encourage you, reach out to your organizations, be active, be engaged, and be involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the Canadian Canola Growers Association, and to Dean and Dave, if he was here, and Jeff and Janice, of course, as well. And a special shout out to Kelly Green, because I think she's usually working behind the scenes putting these amazing panels together for us year after year. So I want to make sure I give her some love as well.